All right, not too long ago, I did the Serbia Must Die one. Now it's Offensive Outrance. Same series, same rules, more or less. Like the same basic concepts behind the rules, but there's a lot of difference. The biggest one being, this is a whole lot bigger. This is, the 1914 Western Front Offensive in the same time period, right? If you remember the Serbian one, and I had kind of a question about this, had like game turns -2 and such. That's because the war starts a little earlier. The fighting starts a little earlier on that front. Here it's a little weird though. The fighting's already started. The Germans have already crossed the Belgian border. They have taken Lille. That's just part of the initial setup for the campaign game here. Let me see if there's anything. Well, first of all, this is 3 maps, so it eats up enough table space. I had to kind of jury-rig something. I used a couple of my game boxes to hold up a little corner so I don't have to put another whole big IKEA table there, which would make maneuvering around and reaching things actually harder. So I thought that was kind of clever. But it does mean, since I don't have a lot of clear space extra for things on the table, I've got a lot of these, the army cards, presented right on the map. That's going to be a bit of a pain because the pieces slide around on them. It's not easy to just pick one up and look at it, and especially when they start getting crowded like this. I mean, I can slide them carefully and everything. I don't really want to go over the whole of the rules. It's got a pretty common flavor to the rules. I'm going to try to hunt for things that I think are different, and then I'm going to call out things that are obviously, because that are baked into the rules for this situation, which that's actually a key thing, is instead of like a system rule book and a per game rule book, in 1914, there aren't a lot of fronts. There's the East Front, and there's Serbia. And that's really it. In terms of anywhere where there's anything of any importance happening. Assuming the Eastern Front covers, from East Prussia through Galicia, etc., it pretty much covers the whole Eastern Front war for 1914. Couple of things about this one that were really kind of annoying for setup. So it includes counters that make it look like it was intended to be expanded. I don't think such an expansion's happened. I know there's some materials out there, but these counters were not used within the game. Some extra forts, maybe the idea that the Germans would be more on the defensive or something along those lines. A bunch of Italian pieces, which are really a fucking pain in the ass. Whoever had played this, or whoever owned it before I did, I got it used. It seems to have almost everything, but I'm not sure. There may be a couple of counters that are missing. I didn't find any units missing, but I may have found some places where some of the organizational counters are missing. You know what? I'll live with it. If it turns out that I need them, I'll work with that. But I noticed this weird, I don't know, yeah, you can see it. There's this sort of glossy type stuff. I think that comes from putting plexiglass or something on top of a map, and it kind of rubs it raw. It might be some other material that's on there, because I only really see it on the corners, but I don't know if it would rub on the map itself. So I just don't know. That may have been like charts or something that were sitting there. Obviously, if it's going to get that kind of rubbing effort on it, and it's got it on every area where it's like, yeah, there's definitely something going on everywhere where there's not map. So I actually don't know if this is plexi or something rubbing it. If it was plexi, it would have to be for, whatever it is, it would have to be for a long time and a lot of use. The weird thing is, the way that the game was bagged and everything, I mean, it wasn't unreasonable, but it was pretty damn obvious that, you know, the person had not played, because if they had, they would have had not played the Grand Campaign, I think. Because if they had, they wouldn't have had the German units and the Italian units, which look the same, bagged together. In fact, there's a lot of pieces that are not in there. And this is so fucking annoying. At the back of the rule book, there's an extra units list, and then there's the fortress setup list. Everything else is by scenario. And, you know, it's kind of where you would expect things. So, you know, you have an introductory scenario, and then you have the Grand Campaign, and then you have some smaller ones that I haven't really looked at. And really, this is what you need to set up. This tells you what happens each game turn, which is helpful for, you know, looking up, making sure you have the right stuff in your piles or whatever, and there's big piles, big piles. But not everything that needs to be set up is in here, and there are counters that are missing that don't need, or that exist that don't need to be set up, that you don't find out, and it doesn't, I didn't see anywhere where it warned me. You know, go look at the extra units list. Well, there's a pile of Dutch. They're pretty easy to see. They look different. I actually thought they might be another nation or something. Well, I thought they might be another allied force, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure what. Maybe I thought they were the Belgians at one point. I have no idea. But then there's a pile of, and I should probably get the Italians in with the Dutch, of German and French units and these Italians. And the Italians are this kind of green, and the Germans are this kind of gray. And, I mean, they're not obvious. It would be fine if it didn't happen, just so happen that the core the core alignments and divisional numbers all lined up exactly the same. So I'm looking at, like, you know, for 6 core and some cav units as well, basically 2 sets of units, it looks like to me. And then I noticed there's a slight different shading, and there's supposedly Italian units that aren't supposed to be in the game, and stuff like that. Again, that may not be a headache if I don't know. I mean, I looked at the counter sheets, and it wasn't clear that, you know, you should separate the two, right? They look similar. They're about the same shade. They're more the same shade than some other pieces that are out the same country. Like the cav pieces are exactly the same coloration, just flipped in terms of which color means what. You'll notice cav pieces have like a dual coloration on them. Well, they basically had the same colors, but reversed on the two, and it's not absolutely clear which one is which. Okay. That was one hassle to the whole thing. Another hassle was, so I had this with the Serbian game, which I bought brand new, punched out the counters, clipped them, and eventually read the rules. And didn't quite understand these things. I was using them as dividers between the army. Well, apparently, there's actually a description in this rule set, which there wasn't in the Serbian rule set, that these are meant to be behind the lines, just as kind of reminders, and they look kind of like, you know, on an operational map image, they show you, hey, this is where this unit is, more or less, and stuff. And they give you a good view of that, and I love them for that. But you still need dividers for things. Well, apparently you're supposed to use the sprues, they call them the spines, from the counter sheet. And you don't find this out until maybe you've punched, clipped, sorted, thrown out your excess counter sheets. There also was no notation on the counter sheets, I can tell you that much, because whenever there's notation on the counter sheets that tells me a nationality or a unit or whatever, I cut that little piece out and keep it for myself, because when I sort units, I often like to have them organized so that I have those little extra pieces of information. Yes, it all goes in a bag at the end, but when I've got it sorted in the counter sheet, sometimes it's helpful for me to make those divisions between, hey, this is this division, this is this corps, whatever. So whenever possible, I do that. I didn't do that with the Serbian. I can't guarantee with this one. I don't remember seeing it when I looked at the counter sheet image. But, you know, you're supposed to just guess that you need those things. Is it a big deal? No. Twist ties work just fine, and I'll be using them for the different countries. The only problem I have is I have basically two colors of twist ties in large numbers, white and green. Green doesn't really suit anybody here, but white is problematic because it doesn't show terribly well. Terrible. You know, it's really not that big a deal. I had my problems with the organizational stuff from the armies anyway. So I guess we start diving into the rules. I don't know. Is there anything new that we haven't seen? We got like these railway markers. They give you railheads. There's a lot more railroads in this game. You have to pay a lot more attention to it, and there's rules that handle dealing with that. Ammo supply is a little different in this one. In the Serbian one, you basically had ammo supply as long as you needed it. For this, there were shortages, and the way they handle that is backwater areas. You can assign these ammo shortage markers, well, army ammo shortage markers or whatever, to, and they'll be coming there. But you also have shortages due to extended range, just like you do with the Serbian one. Training is handled, end training, detraining is handled a little different than it is in that series. I believe in the Serbian one, you just kind of can do rail movement. Here you've got to actually spend points getting on and off the trains and dealing with that kind of problems. There are also things like bottlenecks for the railways, etc. A little bit more detail, a little bit more pain in the ass. Probably not too big a deal. I thought I saw some things with the loss markers that are a little different. And a whole bunch, those are counters that will be needed later. A whole bunch of informational counters. You remember how I had like tiddlywinks all over the Serbian game? If you watched it, you do. Well, instead here they have these, which are sort of the primary goals for the German and French attacks. Their war plans, whatever. Again, there are not, like, Le Grand Guerre gives you options to do different war plans. There are not such options for this. I would hope that if there's ever a grand campaign linking all 3 theaters and maybe more, that they would actually provide some sort of ability to change the direction, etc. So the Germans were focused mainly on smashing west in the early part of the war. I'm not sure that's necessarily the best thing to do. Let's just see. You have these numeric counters, which indicate what game turn units are kind of inactive until, and then you've got ones for whole armies where everything in that front you can pretty much say is inactive. I'm still reversing the direction of units, so everything that's kind of that the top of the counter is facing this way is active. Everything that it's facing towards me is inactive, if that makes any sense. I still have these number counters on the board, but I've got kind of a belt and suspenders approach to that. Turn record chart, player aid. Let's dig into the rules, I guess. One thing that I did want to point out, because I'm afraid I'll forget it if I don't, which is one of the things that most World War I games take as a view is sort of a historical view that's pretty damn old, to tell you the truth, and is very Anglo-centric, which is that the BEF really kicked ass and was, incredibly well trained and really kind of probably better than the German units. This designer takes a different view, one that draws on not just English language history. The earlier history that was English language was very much in favor of the English. Later stuff has come out that is showing real flaws in the English training and doctrinal capabilities during the opening stages of the war. But the BEF is usually put as this godlike, army in so many games. And yes, they kind of did a miracle thing, rushing in quickly and standing and fighting, But here it's taking a more nuanced view than that, and gives them some of the same drawbacks that the French have, actually, which is kind of an interesting view. Apparently, this is not new history. It's stuff from, late 60s, early 70s, and there hasn't been much since then. It's just it didn't get incorporated into wargaming canon for World War I. There usually aren't a lot of... most people are not all that interested in World War I in the gaming community. And it kind of shows in a lot of cases. And here it's kind of nice to see. This is obviously a design by someone who cares more about World War I than about, well, let's get a game on that topic. It's not just well, that's something we haven't covered very well. Let me take a break from thinking about how to handle World War II and try to think about how to handle World War I more. And I mean, there are several people who have taken that stance. That is no question. I mean, the Der Weltkrieg series is very clearly by someone who very much is into World War I rather than, not. But it follows that same kind of older history. And I don't have an opinion one way or another. I am not anything like a historian and not even an amateur. And, but it is interesting to see a different viewpoint. All right, I got to swap batteries. I know this is going to be long, even though I'm going to try to skip most of the rolls. Things that struck me with this, but I think it's true in the Serbian game as well, is that movement point costs are by hex side. They're not by the hex. And that can be kind of important. I think I had a tendency to be charging by the hex. I don't know how big a difference it makes, but it makes more sense to worry about the hex side costs. Now, in some cases, that's key, but that may have actually confused me, although I do vaguely remember that being expressed. Now, I'm looking at stuff like this, and I'm just like, what the fuck is that? I don't see that on here. I got this upland and the difference between upland and lowland, but I don't know what that is. Maybe to indicate an elevation difference. Do we handle those here? So it's kind of weird because they have like pure hex side terrain, but everything is by hex side. And that's kind of important because if you look at a hex, the transition between one hex and another can be expressed with the terrain that's in play. So the transition from this to this can be clear, whereas, you know, this way it's swamp. Yes, this is all swamp or whatever. Inundation or more? I think that's more. It's hard to read. I don't know where the inundations are. There's rules on them. That would probably be this. Okay. So that's one thing. And I'm going to jump away and look back at the rules to try to find things that I want to point out. Eventually, we're going to just come to a string of specialized rules, though. This game has that area of attachment concept and keeping track of subunits on the counter sheet. One thing that's a little different is you're actually able to designate a formation with a core ID to be independent or attached to another core. No more than 3 per side can do this. I don't think that was the case in the Serbian game. I certainly didn't play it as if it was. An important factor to keep in mind there. Also, the attack limits, I think, are different in this, where you're actually allowed to have 2 core attacking together at the same time. In the other one, you were only, at least how I played it, you could only have 1 core attacking at any given time. So it was more strict in terms of organizing your armies. At least what I played. It may not have been the actual rules. Another thing in this one is the losses go the same way, but units don't get destroyed in this as easily. Well, so this, I'm not as sure about the formation variant there, but somewhere or another it tells me basically that units can't get destroyed. And it may just be formational units. What do we have here? Yeah, I don't have it here. Strength loss is going to be somewhere a little different. And yeah, I mean, go to the Serbian rules for the basic flavor of the rules. I'm not finding it. Okay, let's jump to the rail mode. So for here, it's going to cost you a certain number of movement points based on the size of the unit to entrain or detrain. And for a big size formation, that's your entire movement points for your normal movement phase. So that seems heftier than what I was facing in the other game. Maybe I was playing fast and loose. I wasn't getting on trains very much. Trying to think if I ever did. Mainly I just used them for the supply considerations. It's such a small map on the other one that trains really, you know, especially if you had to spend a turn, probably wouldn't help you much. The other thing was you couldn't cross the national boundaries. In this one you can. The rail lines do cross the national boundaries, but there are going to be railhead markers, which I haven't mentioned yet, which you're going to have to convert the rail line to be able to use it. Another thing on the terrain effects that I don't recall there being in the other game, every hex side on a river is considered to have a road bridge. A lot more infrastructure here. And you mark when they're out rather than anything else. So essentially crossing rivers is pretty easy. We'll get to rules for blowing bridges and whatnot. These rules, it's hard to tell. So there's a version 2 and a version 3 out. I've got the original here. The only one that they printed. Version 3 of the living rules requires that you have some additional counters that GMT sold, and I don't know, I didn't see them on the website, and by the time I was like, well, maybe I want to do that, I was already setting up, and I'm like, well, GMT's shipping schedule nowadays, you know, you're not going to get anything quick, so they were really disrupted by the pandemic, and that's fine for ordering games, but if I wanted something, you know, moved to me quickly because I'm going to play the game shortly, yeah, I kind of need to make that decision long before I start digging into the rules and thinking about actually playing it. But I just didn't realize that. And there are variants as well, some counters. What there isn't is sort of like the Italian map, which, you know, would let you, I guess, play out scenarios where Italy, you know, joins the Central Powers first off or whatever. I mean, if you've got a big campaign to deal with that kind of randomness, sure, but it's painful. But yeah, so the version 2 living rules are sadly missing any kind of indication of what's changed and what hasn't. And, you know, that's not really very helpful. You give me a printed rule set, you got to give me some way of finding the materials that I'm going to pencil into it. And this is still paper rather than the weird glossy shit that they print on nowadays. So, you know, I could actually pencil things in, but it's like, yeah, this whole concept of living rules has never really gelled for me. It's like, oh, great. I could work off my, you know, notepad or whatever, you know, which I don't like to read off of, so I will not read those rules to learn them. And it's not as easy for me to page through, and it's not comfortable, and I paid for, I mean, you know, I bought a used game, whatever, but I paid for a printed set of rules, not something electronic and some scrap paper that I can't even really write on, but could only burn. And that's the problem. I actually have a game I bought recently, and I'm really pissed. It only has electronic rules. And I'm like, great. I spent like $80 on something that is, I'm probably never going to play. You know, am I going to print out the rules? I don't know, maybe, but it's this added step, and I got enough games to keep me busy. I was excited about it. Somebody hyped it over on BGG, and I was like, you know, I've been wanting to get the game that it's sort of based on for a long time and could never find it, and this is about the same price and looks nicer. Well, yeah, except it doesn't come with the rules. It comes with an electronic set of the rules somewhere. But yeah, I mean, if you don't give me errata or rules changes, or at least mark up the changes in the new rule book, it's just not going to happen. You can't, you know, and with GMT, where they rewrote rules because they were really bad or something, they made a habit recently, like the last 5-6 years, this probably just a little short of that time, maybe a little longer than 5 or 6 years, I don't know, where they replaced the rules for people, you know. So like One by the Sword, they had to replace the rules for that, if I recall correctly. As opposed to what is it? Multi-Man, where, boy, did they piss me off because they completely fucked up Lincoln, or Lincoln's War, and rewrote the rules, said, this is a much better game. Do you want to try this? And I'm like, no, I don't want to try your goddamn electronic copy of the rules. You know, if you got a few changes, but if you got to rewrite the whole rule. Anyway, that's not the case here. In fact, in a lot of cases, I looked and saw, yeah, you know, it's a minor difference in the rules. But the point being that I'm not really sure how much is intended if they were to re-release this, how much would be closer to the Serbian rules and how much to this? And it's really hard to tell because they actually embed special cases for this into the rules. It's kind of like the Dresden game up there for the Labatt series, which, like, yeah, that was just a horrible rule set. Okay, what was I gonna do? I don't know. I saw forts in the Serbian game. Nobody hit them. They're gonna hit them here. But there's something else here, which is full-blown fortresses. Belgrade probably counts as one in that, but they didn't put a whole set of rules in for it. So the deal with forts, they don't count towards stacking. They're in full supply. They can't attack. When defending alone, they can't choose intense combat. They get flipped if they're forced to retreat, and I think that turns them into, like, units like forts. Nope. They just look more damaged, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what the hell happens to them. A3. I guess they just become a defensive thing. I don't know. We could check. We could check what they mean, because they don't tell me what the values are there. And I don't care if they do or not. Fortress class, steps, artillery, and defense strength. So flipped, they don't seem to have artillery or defense, but they have steps. You can bombard them with siege artillery, and some of them will have a supply symbol and are able to provide supplies. This is like the garrison inside, which is why it has strength levels. Okay. It has a zone of control when it's on its front side. Friendly units can enter and stack in a hex occupied by an enemy fortress on its backside. Fortress units never suffer step losses in combat. They can only suffer them from bombardment. They add their AV to a neighborhood, that's the artillery value, to a neighboring defending combat. Combat, including a fortress, is the same as a regular combat, except the hex can't be flanked. It defends with a PR of 5. That's a proficiency rating. That's good. And the fortress unit's exterior garrison can never be allocated a step loss. When stacked with a combat unit, the fortress never makes an effectiveness check. When not stacked with the combat unit, it counts as a 1 division equivalent for artillery table purposes, and makes its post-combat effectiveness check with a base rating of 11. If it fails, it flips. If it's defending alone, it never gets terrain bonuses. Fortress units defending alone receive terrain bonuses and gain the CRT shift benefit of the IP printed on the map. And you're going to have these red things. Those are improved positions that are already there. They can be level 1 or 2, I believe. The ones that we dig during the game will only be level 1. Fortified camp is invested if all the hexes adjacent to the camp. Okay, so what I haven't talked to, a fortress, a fortified camp. I haven't talked about that. A Fortress 2 unit that's part of a fortified camp, and they have the more impressive view on them, image, whatever. Cannot be attacked if its hex or any hex of its fortified camp has an infantry unit of division size. A fortified camp is invested if all the hexes adjacent to the camp are occupied by an enemy unit or in the zone of control of an enemy unit, and that zone is not occupied. And they're not occupied by a friendly unit. When invested, fortresses cannot repair their steps. Units in an invested fortified camp cannot move to exit the camp nor place a prepared attack marker. They can attack. Any unit stacked within an invested fortified camp will surrender. the instant the last fortress unit step is destroyed. That's anywhere in the camp, okay? Fortified camps are not a single hex. So, like, Antwerp is a fortified camp. Okay, Paris is. Those are a couple of the big ones, but we have, you know, some smaller ones that are just a few hexes, 4 hexes there, whatever. If a bombardment eliminates a fortress unit that's part of an invested fortified camp, the bombarding player can advance into the hex, displace any defending units in that hex. Siege artillery are capable of conducting bombardment. Now, only the Germans have siege artillery, which I find a little disturbing, because I don't know how the French are going to... Well, okay, so the French goals are kind of interesting. They're not the goals of, like, La Grande Guerre, where the French war goals are to take something like Mulhausen you can take, but to take something like this fortress back here, what's that, Strasbourg? Yeah, which would be a major goal for that you might go for. Instead, there are these markers here. Sorry, these are German, which are just sort of indications of advance applicability. Now, Mulhausen is important on the other side, and I don't know if Alsace has a goal. It does not. First Army, I'm sure, is not going to Mulhausen. Must be hiding somewhere. They have a goal. It's probably under some German units. Not those. I don't know where. Here. There we go. That's their primary goal. So they're really kind of trying to, and this again, I think is a little different from how some games handle the Plan 17. The designer sees some merit to Plan 17, actually, which I find particularly amusing, actually. I'm not used to hearing that either. That Joffre gave himself this incredibly flexible attack arrangement that should have, that could have, if you believed in the concept of the offensive war, kind of shaken the Germans back on their heels and disrupted their own attack. Remember, this is a period where the entrenchment defensive static warfare hasn't yet been, determined for World War I. Obviously, if the French had just dug in to begin with, this would have been a different war. But no, this was their reaction to the German war effort, which was, and in part it was also political, which is the Russians needed pressure relieved right away, right from the very beginning. Okay, so where are we here? Fortress bombardment. Siege artillery units are capable of conducting bombardment against enemy fortress units. To bombard, siege artillery must be deployed adjacent to or in the enemy fortress unit's hex. A fortress may be bombarded only once per attack phase unless a siege train headquarters is available, and we have those. They're on the map. I don't know where. It's so hard to find anything when you got this many damn counters on there. Is adjacent to the targeted unit or to another fortress unit of the same fortified camp. In this case, it can be bombarded by an unlimited number of siege artillery units. The proximity of the siege train unit to the bombarding artillery is not important. Each artillery unit can only bombard once per attack phase. Artillery marked with a ×2 or ×4 roll dice multiple times on the bombardment table, which we have not seen. this thing. And you compare the caliber of the firing unit to the type of fortress, and you get a result. It could be step losses, it could be a roll again for a step loss, or a possible step loss, or nothing. You can even get multiple step losses if you got a heavy enough gun on a light enough place. Okay. You identify the targeted fortress unit, designated siege artillery. You record with the heavier artillery rounds, the Germans have a limited number of rounds. 25, I think, for the 30.5, and like 7 for the 42 centimeter. Resolve the bombardment. Conduct this one artillery unit at a time, resolving each unit's bombardment separately. Compare the individual bombarding artillery unit's caliber to the fortress, blah, blah, blah. Following the bombardment, if the fortress unit was destroyed, one adjacent combat unit may advance into the hex. If either the hex is empty or the hex is not empty, but the destroyed fortress unit was part of an invested camp. We got these marked here. Fortress repairs. Any fortress without an exterior garrison that is stacked with a friendly unit or is not adjacent to or stacked with an enemy unit is flipped to its front side during the preliminary phase, as long as it can be repaired. Remember, invested can't be. Each fortified camp... Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that sounds pretty light. Each fortified camp that's not invested can repair one step of any damaged fortress unit in the camp. This includes returning destroyed units to the map. Let me see this. The fortress units cannot repair reduced steps. I feel like this is probably an error, that in either case you can't be invested. Because otherwise, every fortress unit that has a friendly unit in it will repair and get troops. Completely eliminated fortress unit can be returned to the hex it formerly occupied, and only if that hex is occupied by a friendly combat unit. Which again seems weird. I may have to look that up in the errata. All right, let's take a look at the siege artillery and siege train units. Siege artillery look like this. They similar to the normal artillery, a little bit more dots, and they have this big nasty on the other side. Their deployed side is when they're flipped over and it shows their caliber, or whatever you want to call it. It spends their entire move to flip from mobile to deployed for okay. The lighter guns and the Austrian guns can flip they use their entire movement or counter movement phase. The heavier guns have to spend their entire movement phase. And there's not going to be any kind of little movement point counters for this action, unlike some of the other actions. There's Pioneer Regiment Markers, which I think are these. This says Pioneer R. Oh, I guess it's that. This marker gives one siege artillery unit a -1 DRM on the bombardment table. Must be stacked with the headquarters that the marker is assigned to. The marker can only be used once per attack phase. Siege train headquarters units. The siege train headquarter holds assigned siege artillery markers and can hold other units stacked with that headquarters. When the headquarters is adjacent to an enemy fortress, any number of siege artillery can bombard that fortress or any other fortress that's part of that camp. German 30.5 and 42 siege artillery can only bombard if a headquarters is adjacent to the targeted fortress unit or its fortified camp. Siege artillery units can only participate in prep bombardment when stacked with a headquarters. Siege artillery markers. There's a couple of them that travel in reserve. Once deployed on the map, these markers are in all ways considered siege artillery units, except they cannot move. If forced to retreat, they're eliminated from play. To deploy a siege artillery marker, the headquarters must spend its entire movement stationary while stacked with or adjacent to a hex containing a friendly operational railroad hex. You flip the headquarters to its deploying marker side and place the siege artillery marker on the game turn record track one turn later. During the preliminary phase, the marker is placed on the map in deployed mode, and the headquarters is returned to its front side. A headquarters that's on a deploying marker side cannot move. If forced to retreat, it's flipped to its front side, and the deploying marker is eliminated from the game. A deployed siege artillery marker may voluntarily be undeployed during a movement phase and placed back in reserve. The Mets marker, however, can only be flipped once per game. Can only be deployed once per game. Preparatory bombardment. This is an accumulation of heavy guns to prepare an infantry assault. Was used on Antwerp and the Grand Colline by Nancy. Under certain conditions, a German siege train headquarters can conduct a prep bombardment. Specifically, it can only be conducted against a hex that contains an IP printed on the map that is part of Paris or Antwerp or one of the IP hexes around Nancy. The headquarters must place the perp marker, this thing, and be stacked with at least one infantry unit of division size that has a prepared attack marker and placed pointing at the hex to be bombed. Oh, that was something I didn't mention. And a minimum of 4 21-centimeter siege artillery units in deployed mode. The 21-centimeter units are marked with ×2 on their deployed side. I'll count as 2 units in the prep bombardment. The Mets 21-centimeter counts as 4. The prep marker must spend an entire movement phase for the headquarters to place this. Prep occurs during the attack phase just prior to resolving an attack of the hex being bombarded. You identify the targeted hex, the siege train headquarters, and the participating siege artillery units. Decrement prep bombs limit marker by 1. I don't remember what that is. That's 5. Resolve the prep bombardment by determining the number of 21-centimeter units that are participating. And if bigger ones are participating, roll a d6. Apply DRMs and terrain type and cross-reference and find the result. There is a prep table. Let's take a quick look at it. So you look at the number of units, whether or not it includes a heavier gun, which will add an elimination. I'm sorry, an ECM die roll modifier to the thing. That doesn't look like a very good expenditure, the big guns. The light guns look like they're going to cause a lot more. They're going to give you combat result shifts on the combat table, possible strength reduction, and ECM or EC die roll modifiers. So they can really kind of bust up the enemy, I guess. The German player can bombard with the 42-centimeter units only 7 times, and his 30.5s only 25 times. Unfortunately, we had this with the other one. This has ×1 plus 10, which means if I had it on the 10 marker, it would only cover 20 strength points. I've got it on the star. I don't know how to mark 25. I'll make something up. But yeah, the game doesn't allow you to do that with the kind of markers they use. I mean, yes, I have other charts and I can do stuff, or I could put a counter under it or something. But it is rather weird. Okay, I'm going to stop here because of improved positions, but there was something I wanted to go over, which was, I don't remember. Crappies. Yeah, I was pushing through the prep stuff, and something hit me that I did not remember. And I don't think I did previously, that I don't think I mentioned previously. And I'm just lost now. Fuck. All right, I can turn off the camera and see. Ah, yes, prepared attack. So when you do a prepared assault, which is a normal, you know, we had that in the other rule set. When you do a prepared attack, every unit involved in the attack has to have a prepared attack marker on this. I don't think that was the case in the other one. I certainly didn't play it that way. I was creating prepared attacks with one unit. And that may have, if that's a difference, I'm going to start looking things up. If that's a difference, that may have severely impacted the capability to push a harder assault, because we had the Austrians kind of push a little harder than they should have, I thought. Just looked that up, and indeed I fucked it up. You can place a prepared attack marker. You're forced to attack if you do so. This applies to both rule sets. You don't get the column shifts unless all units involved are making the prepared attack. That makes a lot of sense. It really does. But I understand why I missed that. There's a lot of rules to this game. So yeah, this time maybe we won't see quite so much offensive capability going forward, because it really was almost impossible to stop the Austrians. My capacity to fuck up rolls is probably a much worse impact than whatever minor changes there are between the version 1 and version 2 of these rules. It's just something to keep in mind as to the, hey, it's not that big a deal that I can't get the latest rules. You know, people are always like, oh, make sure you get the living rules and everything. I'm like, fuck you, man. I will fuck the game up worse as it is anyway, than anything that's, you know, missing from the rules. The only exception to that is, well, obviously the game without any printed rules is horrible, and something where they just fuck up the rules so completely that really they had to redesign the game. For the most part, there may be some little pieces of errata that are really, really important. Those I can look up. If there's something that it seems so wrong to me, I mean, if something's really fucking the game up, I probably will notice how bad it is. I was noticing something significantly wrong with the Serbian game, which was the Austrians are kicking ass too much. Now, I didn't think. You know, I kept trying to figure out which rules screw-ups had I made that did it, and there were a fair number of them. The prepared attacks definitely adds into that, though. The other one, yeah, there was another one there too. So there was, like, I was doing the modifiers on the charts for the combat wrong and giving the Austrians the better army, you know. And, yeah, there was a lot going on. I didn't think that was enough, but, you know, when you throw in the prepared attacks, that's 2 column shifts. That's a huge deal in this system. Even though it has kind of a, I mean, it's not as big a deal as it is in, like, Third Reich or something, but it is still a big deal. Improved positions, all the improved positions on the map, and they're drawn as these kind of, it's kind of hard to see, but these reddish lines there. They're all level 2, which means I believe they give you 2 column shifts in your favor. Unlike the IPs that we saw in the Serbian game, you can leave the hex and they're fine, so you don't have to occupy them continuously. However, if the enemy moves into them, they're destroyed. And there's nothing to really mark that with. I have a bunch of blank counters I could use for that, whatever. It should probably be pretty obvious, except in some closely fought areas. But, or you know, I guess the biggest chance is if an important location with improved positions is overrun by one side or the other, and then the battle turns, and that's probably the only case where you'd really see it. That, you know. All right. Supply rules. Well, first thing is, in training costs, I don't think apply to supply units. I think they're able to entrain and detrain just fine. They just use the rail movement. Let me. During movement phases, depot can only move along operational railroads, and they have their normal movement point cost. Yeah, so maybe you can entrain them if they're covered in that, but otherwise they are stuck as they were in the other game. I guess the biggest thing that I see here is that you have the capacity to completely relocate an army. You can lift it up and move that command structure somewhere else, and it takes like 2 turns to recover. You also have this secondary depot. You have one special counter, basically. It is a way that you can kind of move your army. I guess the biggest thing is you can put a secondary depot down and declare that you're moving your army, and then you kind of have supply in both places is probably the primary reason for it, because it's associated with a given army. I guess if you wanted to stretch up front ridiculously with a given army, but I can't imagine that happening in this game. We have these ammo shortages. Starting on the 4th interface, I already kind of alluded to these. Counters will come out and they're placed on top of armies, and that army then has a reduced level of ammo it can provide. Now, in the Serbian game, all units had a reduced number of ammo, of combat ammo they could supply. In this, there is no such reduction from normal units. But if a supply unit is put on the extended side, it reduces its amount of units they can supply, or if it has one of these markers on it. And I think the extended sides are actually... I don't know. If that's a 4, that's not very many. Let's see what it is. Sorry, not feeling too hot. Which could be a good sign, of course. Yeah, that's the amount of ammo that core level wagon can supply the armies. It looks like they're able to do more. Having trouble seeing one that I want to flip over, so we'll worry as we get there. I know one of the reduction ones is like an 8, so I'm assuming most of the armies are actually less than, there are more than 8. The game has a whole bunch of substitutions in it. I'm wondering why I haven't seen casualties yet. I wanted to talk about casualties, and I know they happened already, if they're not here. It has a whole bunch of substitutions in it. Units that get upgraded to a slightly better unit, etc. That's always a pain in the ass, and when you're looking at a big a bunch of counters, it's painful. Some of them are combinations of a couple of units, which I think you have to try to get the units close to each other. Yeah. Let's see. Combined substitutions. In some cases, the color of the dot or square is unique. A combo situation can... Yeah, you have to get them stacked together, and you have to try to do that. But like a lot of the rules in this game, it's a little fuzzy. It's like, yeah, you have to try to do it, but on your own schedule, man. Let me look for the casualties, because I'm really disturbed what happened to them. You get replacement points, as with the other game. In this one, it's in a schedule, and you can incorporate them into the units. Okay, it's going to be 9.10, somewhere in that region. And you can store them up to some maximum amount, probably, or negative. And each army has a limitation to how many replacements it can take. And there's an interphase chart. I don't know if that's that, or if that's something here. That doesn't appear to be here, unless I missed something. Yeah, I don't see it here, so I am guessing. Of course, it could be hiding somewhere. Last time it was hiding on the back of a rule book or something. Yeah, there it is, hiding on the back of the rule book. How about that? All right, I'm going to look up where those losses were. Look over this. You can take strength reductions in combat. You can also suffer them from an S or whatever. It's also possible to suffer more than one reduction per combat. You can suffer them from post-combat ECE, forced march ECE, retreating over a mountain ridge or Grand River hexside. Haven't seen that. We had that with the Grand River, with the rivers in the other game. Mountain ridges were just impassable, so that didn't happen. Units suffer strength losses or flip to their backside. The owning player determines which unit suffers it, but it must be a formation, and if not available or already strength reduced to an asset with a backside, a formation unit's exterior garrison can never be allocated to a strength of fortresses. If all the units in a stack are already on their backside or have no backside, a CRT strength reduction marker is used to record the loss. Is reduced by the loss of a replacement. But wait, we haven't gotten to the optional rule, which we're going to play with because it's like the other game. Okay. Infantry units that are division size can take additional strength loss, and they can take a -2 and then a -4 in addition to being flipped over to their final side. There are also some units that have these lines on them, and they can take additional step losses. Well, actually, they must. And actually, the Belgians will not take any markers for these. Okay. But somewhere it tells me that we can never go further. If all units in a stack are already on the backside or have no backside or are already infantry divisions with a -4 strength marker, a CRT strength reduction is recorded as a loss of a replacement, which is what was going on here. But somewhere or another it says you don't lose units. Once you get to that minimal strength, you don't lose the units anymore. Now, I mean, you will lose the replacement points, and if you don't have replacement points, they come off as negative replacement points that you make up later. So there's not really a way to destroy units that way. There might be from isolated retreats and stuff like that, if I recall correctly. That is a possibility. Noticed I created some railroad put some railroad markers on the board. This is the extent of the rail net for the Germans. The French rail net extends entirely up to their border. For the Germans, they have marched beyond their borders and actually have extended the rail a little beyond that somehow. And also, in a couple of cases, their rail net stops near the French border. Again, some hostility has already taken place. We've marched into here. Maybe the French have crossed their border. I don't know. I don't think I saw that, but now a railroad that's behind your railhead marker, it is connected to your map edge, essentially, by railroad hexes, is operational, and you can use it for supply and other purposes. Enemy units, when they pass through or stop in a railroad's hex, they break the connection, and if it's behind the enemy line, the enemy's front line, you don't actually have to step on things. You just exert your force, as it were. If you recall, the game has this concept of front line, so you don't have to capture every hex type of stuff, like you do in some games. During the railroad engineering phase, when does that happen? That happens in your own player turn. All railroad lines behind friendly front lines that are connected to a friendly map edge are fixed. But the GDT Corps is not an army, and it will not convert the front line, the railways behind it, which is important because those railways actually collapse at some point or another. There are special rules that cause them to collapse. So it's got a particular problem. It cannot maintain a front line. And these are smaller units for the most part. Hence the need for the race to the sea. The Réseau du Nord. The region in France north of the Seine and the Oise rivers, from Hirson to the Seine-Oise confluence to the sea. We're looking at 4030. Here. Kind of some interesting stuff going on there. So there's a nice rail nut there. Notice those orange and supposedly red markers, but I see only orange and yellow. Maybe it's red and yellow, and orange is red. I don't know. Those are particular railway structures. Is the Réseau du Nord, Northern Network. This is divided into an eastern and western area by the Somme, which probably is cutting through. And prior to game turn 10, clearing the railroad lines in the eastern area is triggered the instant a German unit moves 8 hexes of Amiens, which is this marker here. I.e., you have captured basically, close enough. Prior to game turn 10, and if the eastern area has been cleared, Clearing of the lines in the eastern area, the instant that. Prior to game turn 10, and if the eastern area has been cleared, clearing of the western area is triggered the instant a German unit moves within 8 hexes of Krell, which is this other one down here. If the eastern area has been cleared, the turn after that, all the French-controlled railroad lines in the Réseau du Nord, east of the Somme, become non-operational. In the western, the player in turn after triggering all the remaining French-controlled railroad lines in the entire region become non-operational. Now, once you do the race to the sea and you connect your front line, to the coast, that gets fixed. But it is a, hey, you bust up, where the BEF is. I think it would be really awful to lose all of it, but I think that actually sounds historical because the Germans do end up north of Paris here. After being cleared, the lines cannot be changed to friendly operational until game turn 14, though. Okay. Bridges and tunnels. Bridges and tunnels can be demolished and reconstructed. They're orange and red diamonds for bridges and orange circles for tunnels. Well, we had an orange and yellow somewhere. I don't remember where I found that. Maybe I was imagining things. So these are orange. Orange. Here we go. I don't know what that yellow circle is, if that's the case. Does it tell us here? Nah. Interesting. So they say orange and red diamonds and orange circles. Well, I don't know how to help you. I have not seen any red diamonds, and well, there's an orange circle. What was the yellow thing again? The yellow's a circle. Yeah, I don't fucking know what that is. Orange railroad bridges and tunnels are automatically demolished the instant a German unit comes within 8 hexes of them. Except for the Pontois. Red railroad bridges, if we see any, are automatically demolished the instant a French unit moves adjacent if the bridge's hex side were German controlled at any point in the game. So red is probably in Germany somewhere. But I have to pee too bad. I don't see any. We took care of that. I'm having real problems with my stomach, what I mean when I said I wasn't feeling well. And so like any pressure from my bladder or whatever is causing a lot of pain. I'm always hoping it's cancer. So, let's see. Red railroad bridges are immediately demolished the instant a French unit moves next to the hex side if the bridge's hex side or German controlled at any point during the game. These are found by Amiens. Okay, 2314. Let's take a look. Wow, that's pretty far into... Okay, well that's not Amiens. All right, but there's one. So yeah, there are a few of them. Chauny and Lefebvre. The Point de Pontois, the bridge at Pontois is labeled a P. It's demolished only if a German unit moves adjacent to its hex side. If demolished, it cannot be reconstructed during the game. This says 1533, which is, Jesus, seriously far away. Okay, there it is. French will keep that open as long as they can. Hexes that have a demolished structure cannot be used for railroad movement or tracing line of communication. In addition, railroad engineering cannot advance beyond that hex side. Each railroad's bridge and tunnel contains a number or an X. If it has a number, it's automatically reconstructed on the game turn that corresponds to that number. Those with an X cannot be reconstructed. I guess if it's somehow destroyed twice, it can never be fixed. I don't know. The yellow circles with black numbers, there we go, are special railroad engineering feats. These are exactly like other railroad construction, except only the German player can use them. Once reconstructed, the railroad lines can only provide supply and move depots. You can't move trains over them. And these are basically things that are so damaged, that the damage is so great that it couldn't be repaired. So like what this looks like, it's probably a tunnel or whatever, and a little rail track was scratched around the edge of it to make up for it. Railroad line transit limits. bottlenecks. Both players faced problems transporting troops caused by choke points. For the Germans, this was due to the way Belgian railways are set up. For the French, it was due to a lot of destruction they did themselves. So these are these capacity markers. Do I have any on the board? I think I do. There's one. Okay. And French markers are in a number of 3 locations: Rouen, Pontoise, and Eu. The instant a German unit moves within 8 hexes of Creel, they cause a problem. The Germans are in Arlon and Liège, and these are active. Namur will come in on the 6th interphase. They don't say what the bottleneck's capability is, so I set it at the maximum. And every time a unit uses the railroad marker, the unit's rail transport cost, its size basically, is subtracted from that amount. And that lasts for the length of a turn. The length of an interphase. Depots, however, are not affected by bottlenecks and count as 0 against capacity, and you can draw supply and whatnot. Each interphase, the railroad BK markers are reoriented to full capacity. The railroad movement of the new Reserve Corps. On game turn 23, to allow the transport of the new Reserve Corps, the Liège, Namur, and Arlon bottlenecks capacities will be increased by 3.5. The transport of the 22nd and 23rd Corps followed a different route. Or they had 2 different routes or whatever. I don't know whether this is just historical. There's places where sometimes historical stuff doesn't get italicized when paragraph changes. With no railroad capacity remaining on the Belgian network, the 24th Reserve Corps was routed to Metz. Great, you know. Awesome. All right, 2 hex units are going to be the same, more or less. Voluntary retirement. So this is kind of a gimme rule, or a mulligan type rule. Units are, if they're adjacent to an enemy and not isolated, they can voluntarily retire from 1 hex, even from an enemy zone of control to an enemy zone of control. The main reason for this is something I saw in the Serbian game, which was the difficulty of extricating yourself. It's an optional rule because it is kind of meant to make life easier, and we'll see whether I use it or not. I'm going to try not to have to use it. And if the game is, you know, if to me it's making sense, if I get trapped because I was stupid, as opposed to just not noticing that I was in danger, I may not apply it. Okay, we have national special rules. I'm going to take a break. We come to the things that are special rules for the scenario. And there's a fair amount of them. There honestly are. We're looking at 6 pages, 7 pages. Inferior combat doctrine. First 5 turns of the game, the Allies, if they get a die result on the second die that's the best they can get, they re-roll both dice. I'm not sure why both. That doesn't really make a difference, but whatever. Keeps some uncertainty. This includes the British. And my feeling with that was the original, wow, why are the British, you know, the BEF is usually treated so godlike in games. What's going on here, but that's better explained later. And actually some of it is here. So for the British Army that was trained for colonial war, the Haldane reforms hadn't been adequately long to fix the situation with the Army. Again, you know, I'm not a serious historian, so this name sounds familiar, but you know, my memory is Napoleonic War. The Brits were these the amazing thin red line, and then through the colonial wars they were relatively tough. And I always assumed that this was that same tough, hardcore of the professional British Army that was coming in as the BEF, and that was the Y. It doesn't seem to be accurate. British naval support. Any Allied unit defending on the coastal hex can be given naval support with 2 columns to the left. This can be used once in each attack phase. Now remember, there's 2 attack phases in each player turn. It's unlikely you'll be using naval fire on both of them, but the Ijzir River inundation. This is depicted on the map, but it's not existed until the Allied player creates it once per game during the Allied player's preliminary phase. If they occupy Newport, 3511, they can create the inundation. They need a 1 through 5 to do so. It doesn't say what happens if you fail. I assume you get multiple chances. I don't see a counter for this, which means I'm probably going to have trouble remembering it. 3511 is Newport. That's not 35. So that's here. This appears to be inundation. I think this is too. Okay. I guess this particular inundation is not in effect. Now we also have some striping here, which again I think is indicating an elevation change. It's not specified in the rules. Okay. Game turn 1, French units cannot force march. Like I ever remember to. Paris. The Paris garrison is an army with special characteristics that can overlap with the other areas of occupation. That's important because the AOA actually goes all the way to the front. Paris is just its own little blob back there, and that's fine. Paris garrison area. It has districts, central, north, northeast, south, whatever. Each district has a garrison infantry that must remain in that district. If you don't have the right district, if you don't have a district designation, you can move anywhere. There's a Paris depot within the city that's always an active supply source and can provide supply to any French unit within the Paris garrison area only. Paris organizational display. It holds the attachments of all the items. It actually can hold a core, apparently. Which may be supposed to be this unit here, but I don't have a core marker free for it, so I guess not, no. I could have put it as an independent from there, but I want that moving forward. That's like the one unit that I have discretion placing with the French, and I might have had some with the Germans as well. Okay, the GDT, this is a special corps. These rules expire on game turn 18. It cannot be attached to an army. It has its own little display way up there. Most of the units are too small to belong on the display. That's kind of a fuzzy area. What is the status of units that aren't stacked with a formation and aren't on the display? I think they can be kind of funneled around pretty easily. It doesn't make much difference. You may have to pre-declare, yeah, we fudge that, your organizational boundaries if it's your turn. Okay, let's see what happens here. During game turns 1 through 5, units attached to the GDT must maintain a line of contiguous zone of control from any hex adjacent to La Manche, the English Channel, to a zone of control of an Allied unit attached to an army. So I've got to try to keep some kind of chain of line there. Not that that really matters too much. Detachment units, it has units that have, so this is kind of interesting. It has units that have reduced strength. They start off with these little -4 markers. I don't think the Serbian game had specific extra counters that were aligned with a unit for this. Just they were like at a -4 counter. It's kind of nice to see that the detachment is the reason for it. Helps remind you that you can recombine those units. Game turn 18. A bunch of territorial units are replacing the GDT units, and all the GDT attachment markers flip over. They'll end up with a higher combat effectiveness, and the core disappears, and its supply train goes away. And in this case, the other thing that they mention is you have to be careful if we're getting pushed back to where the rail lines are going to collapse. That command is particularly in danger. The divisions are the group des Armands were made up of the oldest year groups. Yeah. French reserve divisions. Okay, so there's a bunch of divisions that come in with an R on their ID. On the third interphase of the game, I roll a die, and from then on until it happens, and something changes. They get flipped over to their backside, and they have a better CE. They get some training. The Chasseurs d'Alpine PR bonus. Moo. I think they have 9.72. Let's see what this is. I think they get a bonus in the mountains. A French force that contains this unit when attacking into or defending the mountains adds 1 to its proficiency or whatever. Okay. The British. During the campaign, the BEF was repositioned from Le Havre to Saint-Nazaire. When positioned in Le Havre, the British traced to 0121, and that base is on the board. It's to Saint-Nazaire, it's going to drop back to there because, yeah, Paris, it gets wheeled around. If things work. If I don't screw up as many rules as I did in the Serbian one. Okay. Upon beginning the transfer, they trace their line of communication via railroad lines that lead off the map, and apparently there's 2 spaces that they can go to. Transfer trigger and duration. The transfer is initiated involuntarily during the first 8 turns in the Allied preliminary phase, following the instant a German unit moves within 8 hexes of Amiens. And again, that's the northernmost of those little red markers that are way back in the back. We're going to be using more of the map if we do anything historical here. This is most of that first year, right? Yeah. Deep into November. Okay. Or can be initiated voluntarily in any preliminary phase after game turn 6. When initiated, the Le Havre marker moves to Saint-Nazaire side and is put in a hex. And the base transfer process complete is going to be 3 game turns later. For the duration of the transfer, the Army's Army provision limit is 4 per game turn, and there's going to be a marker for that, one of these guys, I think. After game turn 6, the British may voluntarily begin the transfer. They never have to if they're not forced to. I don't know what happens. I guess if the first 8 turns the Germans don't reach that objective, then the British can only do it voluntarily. Like, they can't be forced into it. You can effectively be forced, though, I'm sure. Okay. The Samson Armored Car Unit is an LOC regiment. Okay, we haven't talked about these, 8.73, and I don't understand them. There are a lot of these in the game. Let's take a look at these. This is one of those, LOC units. LOC units are intended to guard the enemy's rear areas. Okay, this one, fine, whatever. They can occupy regions without significant combat forces. They cannot voluntarily enter an enemy's zone of control. Friendly units do not negate or enemy-controlled hexes. They're meant to be used in your own backfields. Line of communications units cannot advance after combat into an enemy unit zone of control. LOC CAV units, in addition to the above restriction, the LOC CAV units must exercise CAV reaction and CAV retirement if eligible. Okay, so they just kind of run away if you come near them. The Samson armored car is one of them. I honestly don't know what a 0-0 unit that has to run away can possibly do. The other ones, yeah, you know, ones that have actual strength are doing something. Most of them are 0-0 units, which I don't know what to talk about. You know, I mean, the combat chart is an odds chart. Yes, I guess infinity has a value, but, you know, they're just going to get run off. And I really do not know what they're expected to do. I forgot about them completely, but yeah, I mean, I set up a bunch of these and I'm just left with the, what? I don't know what they're doing. They're not strong enough. You know, there's nothing that weak that will be running out raiding them. And if there is, it'll still be infinitely larger if it has a strength point. And these are the only things with 0. So I have no idea. And this one has a 0. No idea. Royal Naval Division. 3 infantry units, Marine Naval, and 2 Naval are the Royal Naval Division. They have, apparently there's a BEF naval holding box somewhere here, probably that little blue thing. They can go there via naval movement. That's in England. When all units are stacked in 1 hex, they count as 1 asset for stacking purposes. Remember, you're normally only allowed 2 assets in a hex. So. They can be attached to a Belgian formation. We haven't talked about this before. There's some interop problems. 5.25. Yeah. I mean, there's stuff that I just haven't caught because it wasn't clear. Allied corps formations and asset units can only be attached to an army of the same nationality. The units of the British Royal Naval Division are the exception to that. I mean, it's not that big a deal, but I like that I forgot to tell you. If I screwed it up, it might be kind of a deal. They get a free railroad point that they can use to entrain those units during a movement phase. This doesn't expire, but it can only be used once. Once it's used, you remove the marker. If Antwerp surrenders, the Royal Naval Division is withdrawn from the game. If the surrender occurs prior to the unit's arrival, it never shows up. If after the arrival, they leave in the following preliminary phase, and I, again, don't know. This is 23 something. It's not one of these, but it might be under the Belgian special rules. I don't know. So there are a number of counters that are kicking around with special rules on them. Many of them are over on the chart there. I don't know specifically what these are. These are about the surrender of Antwerp, I'm sure, but I don't know if they actually repeat that or refer to it. Belgian formations. Belgian formations are independent formations. Each stack of independent formations is its own corps. This is a little different. Normally, an independent unit is considered its own corps. Here it's a stack of units can be considered a corps, which means they can at least defend together. So you don't lose all stacking capability with the Belgians because they don't have a corps formation. So they have counters that, like some of the Cav counters, can take multiple hits. And then the special thing is the strength reduced secondary counter can suffer no further strength reduction. So you don't get that extra -2, -4 counter on top of them. Which means what? I mean, They have to take replacements earlier. They don't have any what? I don't know. I really don't know. There is something about these things dying, though. So, during the campaigns in the Belgian Army's supply base was repositioned twice, first from Antwerp to Ostend, and when it was again threatened, it fled into France. When positioned in Antwerp, the Belgians traced their line of communication to 5216, which is in Antwerp. Upon the beginning of the base process, transfer process, they traced to 3710. Going to be some up here. Ostend, not Ostend. Spelled differently here. Okay. Upon fleeing to France, they traced their line of communication to any port in France. Transferred to Ostend. This can be voluntarily done during any Allied preliminary phase, but it's involuntary during the Allied preliminary phase. Following the instant a German unit moves adjacent to Antwerp. When initiated, remove the Antwerp Army base and place the Ostend marker in 3710. In addition, place the base transfer process complete 3 turns in the future. And for the duration of the transfer, the Army provision limit is only 4. And that's probably what this is. Yeah. Fleeing can be initiated from Ostend during the Allied attachment phase, but it's initiated involuntarily following the German unit moves adjacent to Ostend. When initiated, you flip the Ostend Army base marker to its French port side and place it on a French port hex. The Belgian base transfer again will place it permanently on the Belgian Army depot for the remainder of the game. The provision limit is 4. In addition, you remove from the game the LOCC and Garde Civique asset units. Surrender of Antwerp. If German units occupy 51-17 and 52-16 at the end of any game turn, Antwerp surrenders. In the following Allied preliminary phase, remove all remaining fortress and combat units with the ID Antwerp and the Antwerp depot. Place the German Antwerp surrenders marker on the game turn record track 3 turns out. Why? Well, we'll get there, I guess. It says 25.41. That doesn't exist. So, gosh. I don't know. Oh, 25.41. Okay, that creates the Army group. Yeah. Okay. On the second interphase, the Allied player gets a special rail point that can be used to entrain a Belgian unit. It never expires, but can only be used once. Once the rail point has been used, remove the marker. The Belgians have a pontoon bridge, 51-16, 52-16. It's going to be... (51-16) is here. 52-16 is here. There's kind of a bridge thing. It's only a pontoon bridge, so it's harder to see. It's a roadway bridge in all respects, except only one formation can cross over it per movement phase. We hope we remember that. The pontoon bridge is destroyed and made unusable when a German unit occupies either of those hexes. The Antwerp depot cannot move further than 5 hexes from Antwerp. The ammo shortage marker cannot be allocated to the Belgian Army. They have their own shortages, so it wouldn't really be fair. It wouldn't make sense. Like, it would be a free place you could put it. German special roles. The Hoher Cavalry Commander. Prior to game turn 10, the German cavalry is assigned to fixed locations or semi-fixed. So like the Cav divisions assigned to the 4th and 5th Army can only be in the 4th and 5th Armies. And I've got these markers, there's a bunch of them. Some of them are fixed to specific armies, some of them are paired between 2 armies. This lasts until game turn 10. On game turn 6, the Germans must withdraw 2 first-line corps and send them off to Hindenburg, and 4 attached division-sized infantry formations. First line means not reserve, and 1 cavalry division. All German corps with numeric ID and the GD and GDR are first-line corps. That kind of doesn't matter. Like, I guess it does. No. Like, well, I guess the constituent units that are associated with the corps would have to go with it. So, yeah. Okay. It does make a potential difference. An optional restriction, none of the infantry formations can be attached to the 6th or 7th Army because they're too far away. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me. Probably have other problems. Well, mainly probably because they're defending Bavaria. Okay. German truck markers. So some of the commands... let's see if we got this one. Have a truck under them. That truck is basically a one-use ammo supply. Two use, except for the 3rd Army, which only has one side. It has a larger range than normal, and it's basically able to supply something. The point there is these trucks broke down really early in the war, but they helped improve the supply situation during the initial invasion. Army Group Belgian. The movement of the depot unit for AG Belgian is restricted upon arrival. It must be placed anywhere on and then remain on the double-track railroad line running between Brussels and Liège. How can I tell double and single track? Double track, okay. I think double track, oh, it's not just a heavier line. It's actually got some stuff going on. But doesn't single track? I can't tell. I honestly cannot tell a difference. I had this problem with the other. So I know this is double track. I don't know what this is, but it's different from this. And is there any narrow gauge? Again, I can't really tell. Like there's supposed to be some dotted. And I don't see that. So I'm like tempted to say that the solid single lines, which look like single or double track to me, like they're definitely drawn different on the map than they are in reality. And this is a problem. But I would say this is the heaviest, this is the second heaviest, this is the third. But they don't match what's on there. Maybe that's in errata, maybe not. I mean, if I don't see any dots running through the mountains, I'm pretty much feeling like that's the best I got. Okay. Where were we? Yeah. Okay, this railroad line is shaded purple for easy recognition. Well, maybe that's why I can tell the difference between this and others. So now I've got the, what if I look here and this looks more like this. So I'm beginning to say double track has the crosshatch, single track doesn't have the crosshatch, and if I ever find anything with dots, well, there we go. That's the narrow gauge. Okay. And that has effects on the supply, the number of armies that can be supplied on it. I'd have to look it up. And a lot of this is really of that nature where I'm going to have to look it up. 3 game turns after the surrender of Antwerp, end use of the AG Belgian organizational display, and remove the depot and all formations and assets with ID Belgian from the map. In addition, remove 1 Landwehr brigade of the German player's choice that was attached to AG Belgian. Place the OHL artillery on the map and substitute the Marine Division for its Belgian Marine counterpart, and the 2nd Reserve Ersatz Brigade for the Brussels II counterpart. Yeah, well, okay. So that's what the 3-turn limit is. It's when the Belgian command goes away. Now, Brussels, Liege's here. Brussels is not that far. And the AG Belgian is not on the board yet. I don't know how likely, I don't know. Icarn division, reverse combination. There's a combination which can be reversed. The German 1B Landwehr and 2B Landwehr brigades are marked with a yellow square. The Icarn division has 2. This is very much like the pieces in the Serbian. And they worked great in the Serbian game because you wanted to uncombine units so that they could be in the mountains. And I'm assuming that these are units that are going to be in the mountains. Other German roles: siege train headquarters, preparatory bombardment, special railroad engineering, railroad movement of the new reserve corps. Oh, we're almost done. Strategic plans. Okay, there is lots of historical information on the strategic plans that, like, this is one of the places where it starts out in italics and then goes into normal text, and I think I'm looking at rules, but it's not. Each strategic plan has objectives, a primary objective, and a number of operational objectives. The primary objective is captured. The plan is considered achieved, and then you're no longer bound. Capturing the primary objective, it's captured if you get to it, yeah. Cav can't capture objectives, strategic plan movement, and combat restrictions. All infantry formations, except CI and demoralized, are affected by the strategic plan. Formations with a CI or worse, combat ineffectual or worse, are able to withdraw and recover. I know that in the Serbian game I was withdrawing units that were not that badly damaged. If a restricted infantry formation moves from one hex to another, it must end its movement a minimum 1 hex closer to its army's personal objective. Now, they try to say this is not an idiot roll. I have to somewhat disagree, but whatever. I mean, they may be decent plans, but they force you into not being able to do things you want to do, like being able to recover your troops rather than push on full speed. And it gets worse. If a restricted infantry formation attacks, it must declare intense combat. It must never declare intense combat because it looks bad. Let me see if that is in the Serbian game. And then I'm going to take a little break before I go into the specifics of the plans. Not as restrictive. The Serbian game, if you want to abandon your strategic plan, you had to make a certain number of mandated intense attacks. I'm tempted to look this one up in the errata. Or in the version 2 rules, because that seems a little harsh. It does seem like Plan 17, but it seems a little harsh in general. Now, if you take a look at the German goals, they're probably going to bust through most of their goals pretty easily, and they're not going to be in too much trouble. And this is kind of one of the things. I don't get the whole Schlieffen plan laid out here, right? I get the initial advance, and that's it. That's my army plans. goals. Now, that's not enough to win the game, but the Army goals are actually pretty limited in scope. You can see some of them are not even behind the enemy lines. The same is true for the French goals as well. Some of them are not behind enemy lines. But yeah, that if I have to continually make intense attacks, you might actually see the abandonment of plans, and that makes sense too. So I don't know which way it's likely to go. So maybe I'll look it up, maybe I won't. Okay, I'm looking at the operational objectives. I mean, there are lists of places that get you to the main location listed. Belgium and Britain don't have them. Germany, huge amount of information that's historical. I think all of this is down to about here, and then list of places, and you know what? The 6th Army has a special role with an idle strategic plan. After the 2nd Army abandoned its plan, or if it's not activated by French action. Now that's weird because, as far as I understood, the 6th Army actually is active, and maybe that's meant to not be that. The Germans roll a die roll on a 1, 2, or 3. It's activated with its own special plan. Prior to its activation, it can't place any prepared assaults, and it's prohibited from detaching any formation, but no objectives. Oh, they're listed up here. Okay. German 5th Army cannot activate or abandon its strategic plan on its own. The 5th Army's plan ends whenever the 4th Army either captures its objective or abandons its plan. Now, the 5th Army actually has goals. It just has no primary objective. So it's got things to move towards. Remember, you just have to move towards one of the objectives. During play, you get victory points. When you abandon your strategic plan, depending on how far away you are, you take a penalty. If you're 1 hex away, it's probably pretty hard to abandon it. You know, I mean, it's like, why take a 3-point penalty if, well, it may depend on what it is. 2 hexes again, wow, that's a lot of points for very little action. And then you start getting further than that, and it's a huge amount of points. So it's really tough to abandon them, I would think. Prior to game turn 7, now this is not a strategic plan. If the French take Mulhausen, which is down here, they get 10 victory points. Prior to game turn 7, once per game at the end of any player turn of the German player's choosing, if the Germans control Luneville, Baccarat, or Saint D, they can take an extra 3 points per city they control. Probably want to do that on turn 6, I guess. On the second interphase, and each interphase thereafter, the Germans get victory points due to an advance into France. To get the number they get, the furthest German infantry formation, not counting assets or cav, subtract the hex's column number from the hex's row number. That's weird, okay? So you'll be looking at every hex they advance into, and the lower their column is great, but they have to, you know, it's best way down here. Advances here, any ground they get down here, which is not the axis of their advance, they're going to get more points for. So the deeper south that they are, the higher the row number is going to be. Now, can they get negative? Yeah, it can be negative, and it has to be west of column 45XX. For the most part, I don't think that the Germans are going to make any push in this direction. They're not set up to do that at all. But whatever ground they make, they're going to want to go deep and southward, which explains kind of the curve to the Schlieffen plan, right? At least in Gaul. But in reality, it means that they can get lots of victory points for, you know, getting somewhere here maybe. Well, not lots. This would be the break-even point, right? Somewhere around here. Of course, the further west they go, it goes diagonally from there. So, anyway, that is on the second interphase. So at least I got some time to make some ground. Contiguous front line, starting on the second interphase. Each player suffers a victory point penalty for each hex in the southern part of the front line that does not occupy with a fort, fortress, or combat unit, excluding line of communication. Okay. The Allies have to maintain from the Swiss border up to Verdun. That's a lot of space. It's going to be hard. And the Germans have to maintain it from the Swiss border to hex row 42. Which is about in the same general area up here. This line up here. So yeah, the entire south has to, I mean, we're not just talking interlocking zones. We're talking units have to be in every single space, or forts. But not line of communication units, so you can't use those shitty things. Starting on game turn on the 8th interphase, and each interphase thereafter, the German player loses 3 victory points if the Marine Division is not stacked in a coastal hex. If a German unit ever enters Paris, the German player earns 25 victory points. If the German player controls Paris at the end of the game, in its entirety, they win. And otherwise, lots and lots of places, locations, some of which have multiple things, and each one's worth 4 victory points. You get 15 points out of the following list: Antwerp, Rouen, Troyes, and Nancy. You get 4 victory points when an enemy formation unit is eliminated, and 1 when an asset is eliminated. Units due to surrender of Antwerp or fleeing Ostend are not counted. I don't know how you eliminate formations other than isolation. Maybe assets can be eliminated through the normal rules, because the thing kind of implies that only divisions are exempt. We'll have to take another look. The Germans get 3 points for each Belgian division-size unit that is in a maximum strength reduction state. Okay, let's take a look at destruction of units. I don't know how you do it. So one way is certainly in combat, maybe with the... but let's take a look at isolation, which will be under the supply rules, if I can find them. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. All right. There we go. Surrender due to retreat after combat. Unit surrender for invested camps. So those are the surrender rules. Retreat after combat is if you cannot retreat. And apparently you have to be isolated at the same time, I guess. Now, what was the other one? The other one is the combat rules for enemy destruction. And again, I'm pretty sure that this was allowed in the other.
If all the units in the stack are already on their backside or have no backside, a CRT strength reduction is caused by a replacement. Yeah, I don't think you can destroy units unless they're isolated. Which, we're not going to see a lot of points being moved for that, I guess. Oh, that's about it. There's really nothing too fancy in the playbook that I recall. All the special rules, again, are kind of baked into the main rule book. Let's see if there's anything. I mean, the Grand Campaign is... Yeah, we got... This is all setup stuff. Telling you, hey, things that you really should remember, but they're basically part of the base rules. I don't think there are any special rules for this. There may be for some of the others. So that's about it. Probably not going to get started today. I'm in too much pain, to be honest. But I'm hoping that I have more fun with this than I did with the Serbian one. Even if you kind of so some of the excitement in the Serbian one, what there was that the Austrians managed to gain more ground than they probably should, and that kind of made it more fun for a little while. But then it kind of disturbed me because, well, it became obvious that, you know, there was just no way under the way I was playing the game that the Serbs could win. But yeah, I'm expecting, you know, that was a weird, the actual situations of the battle there are kind of weird. And I don't feel like the game reflected them very well. But again, there were a couple of things that I did that cheated in favor of the Austrians and put them in a position. You know, it's really hard to say that, yeah, it was an unbalanced game if I was cheating in as many ways as I was in their favor. I hope to cheat a little less in this, but no guarantees, man. No guarantees. All right, let's send it up.
During